from Cambridge, Massachusetts, where a number of our colleagues happen to be. My name is Mike Dukakis. I'm former governor of Massachusetts. Past 25 years, I've been teaching public policy at Northeastern University in Boston, and in the winter, here at UCLA in Los Angeles. It's a nice arrangement, and we're enjoying wonderful 85-degree days out here in Los Angeles, and hoping that our friends back in the Boston area will make it through another winter and do it well, and that my favorite transit system will not collapse again. Let me introduce you to the Boston Global Forum, something that we created about 3.5 years ago to try to bring together lots of good, bright, intelligent minds that happen to be in the Boston area. And in doing so, to reach out through the medium of online conferences to so many of you all over the world. And we've been doing this now for 3.5 years, picking one topic each year to focus on. That included international labor standards after the collapse of those buildings in Bangladesh. It has included the whole issue of cyber warfare, which we are now focusing on. We've looked at a number of important international issues, all with the collaboration and help of so many of you around the globe, and with guests who have been good enough to spend time with us and to be part of this. As many of you know, the G7 summit is going to be taking place. And we thought it would be appropriate this year, before the summit in late May, to focus on another important topic, and that is the whole issue of cyber terrorism, cyber warfare, and the use of cyber in international relations. And what we hope to do as a result of a series of 1-hour sessions, and this is one of them, is first introduce you to a distinguished guest who will be our resource person and join us and give us the benefit of his or her thought, and then your participation from around the globe, and we're very grateful to all of you for doing that. These will be 60-minute dialogues. We had our first on the 3rd of February with David Sanger, the New York Times correspondent and writer. It went extremely well. And we're lucky today to have Bruce Schneier with us, who's a man of many parts and many places, based in Minneapolis, but spending some time with us in Cambridge as a fellow at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at the Harvard Law School. And I'm going to be introducing you to him shortly. Why is this topic so important? Frankly, because nations all over the world now are spending precious resources and a great deal of time and attention on gearing up for cyber warfare. And as in the case of so many threats to this world of ours, the real challenge, it seems to me, is whether or not we're going to get ahead of this issue rather than behind it, and see if we can bring together, or help to bring together, the international community around an agreement, perhaps a treaty, a code of conduct, which will make it less likely that nations will be spending precious dollars on this kind of thing, and can come together and agree on the use of cyber, preferably for peaceful and not wartime activities. Here in the United States, we always hear about what the Russians and the Chinese and lots of other people are doing when it comes to the use of cyber. But I think everybody knows the United States is spending billions of dollars today on our cyber warfare capacity. And you may justify that by saying, well, other people are doing it, so we have to do it. But it seems to me that one of the things the United States should be doing is taking leadership on these kinds of issues, seeing if we can't bring the international community together to make some sense out of this thing before we're off to the races on another form of warfare, this time cyber. So that's going to be the subject of our discussion today. And I want to begin by introducing you to Bruce Schneier. And Bruce, asking you if you would respond to that and to the general problem we're facing here. Where are we going? What are we doing? Do we know what we're doing? And when I say we, I mean the entire international community, including the United States. And how do we seek to try to get control of this in a way that will make it much less necessary for people to be running around spending billions on this kind of thing when we all have much more useful and constructive goals and purposes to use those resources other than getting engaged in a new form of warfare. What do you think?
So I think you described it properly. We're very much in the early years of a cyber war arms race, that countries are building cyber warfare capabilities. US, UK, China, Russia, NATO countries, Israel. I mean, the list of countries you can easily imagine. And I'm not sure we know what we're doing. This is a very new area. And you can sort of step back and see this in cyberspace in general. It is a new area for our society. We barely understand it. It's full of emergent properties. Things regularly happen that surprise us. And cyber conflict is that way. Countries are building weapons, and they have a lot of interesting characteristics. You know, it is a arms race, but it's not traditional like the nuclear arms race, where you or just the military arms race to the Warsaw Pact and NATO. There are some really interesting characteristics because military and civilian infrastructures are tightly aligned. Ours and theirs are tightly aligned, and we end up having these interesting discussions about offense versus defense. You talk about runaway spending and who's doing what to whom. That is a very big area of discussion. Attribution. You know, we could talk about that. Is much harder in cyberspace than the real world. The notion that I, as one side, can wholly through my actions disarm my opponent by patching vulnerabilities and making the internet more secure is something you don't see anyplace other than cyberspace. There are all these things going on. And what you have in the United States and other countries are these cyber commands being built. Cyber warriors, and numbering in the thousands in different countries for both offensive and defensive capabilities. The melding of intelligence and attack. Right, in the United States, U.S. Cyber Command is located at Fort Meade, Maryland, where the NSA is. The officer in charge of the U.S. Cyber Command is right now Admiral Rogers, who's also in charge of the NSA. And that reflects the fact that although attack and espionage are very different politically, they're identical technically. Now, to take a very easy example, all the steps are reconnaissance, breaking in, figuring out what to do, and the very last step is either copy star dot star or delete star dot star. The difference between attack and espionage is one command. And as the victim, as the recipient, you don't know what's going to happen. So your defense is very different. The way to have detente, we have a lot of trouble in the United States, for example, blaming China for the Office of Personnel Management attack. The reason is because we do the same thing. It wasn't an attack, it was espionage. So we are reluctant to call that out because, as General Hayden, former NSA director, said on television, we would have done the same thing in a minute. So here we are trying to balance attack versus espionage, attack versus defense, infrastructure, right? Civilian, military, ours versus theirs, making this very complicated. I mean, there are courses, there are degrees in this stuff because it's hard, and even military strategists don't understand this.
Bruce, let me ask you a question, because I'm not sure I really fully understand this. We, I guess, assume maybe have good information that the Chinese or some organization in China penetrated our personnel records at the Office of Personnel Management. First question is, why would they want to do that?
It's an interesting question, and we haven't officially blamed China. We did, and then we walked it back. And there's a lot of politics here, I think, having to do with the treaty, or at least the agreement we came to a few months ago on espionage. What we know is that personal data is valuable. And that's really why we're here. It's valuable for a lot of reasons. Companies like Facebook and Google collect it because they use it for manipulation, for persuasion, for advertising, right? The business model of the internet. It's collected by the NSA, who uses it to try to track criminals and terrorists and foreign leaders. If you are someone like China or even the United States, if you can go and get the personnel records of all the government employees of your opponent, you can do that. You can use that for a lot of things. You can target attacks. So now the person, the group who has this data can now target very specific, very well crafted phishing attacks against US personnel, which will break into those networks. The attacker can use that database that includes fingerprint data and watch everybody who comes into the country. So if it is China, this has greatly affected our ability to run human intelligence operations inside China for a generation. It's an enormously valuable trove of data. And the things that can be done to it, I mean, it's interesting is we didn't really think about it until it was stolen. This is a database that wasn't well protected because people didn't really think through of how valuable it is. Once it was stolen, you'd see, oh my God, you could do this, you could do that, you could do that. And suddenly you realize how valuable this is.
Give us an example. Let's assume that they got into the records of the United States Department of Agriculture and got them all. And I assume that means what? Everybody working for the United States Department of Agriculture. What would a hostile or potentially hostile adversary want to do with that stuff?
So agriculture, not that much, but this is the way data works. Data doesn't come in small units anymore. You can't steal 10 credit card numbers. They come in blocks of 10 million. So if our attackers, let's assume they were the Chinese, want the identities of military employees, Department of Energy employees, CIA employees, they can't get those, right? Those are closely guarded in those organizations. OPM had everybody, so it was easier to take everybody, including agriculture, than it was to take just what you wanted.
And including the CIA.
Again and again an attack.
And including the CIA, for example, or Defense Department employees, or what?
CIA seems to be separate, but there are some interesting things about data that's in the database that you can infer CIA employment by what's missing. I don't know the details here, but certainly you can look at the list of postings to the US Embassy in Beijing, beat them against this database. People who don't appear in the normal civilian unclassified database are likely to be agents. But that database include clearance information. I mean, there's a document that people fill out when they get a government clearance that it's incredibly intimate. And those documents were in that database, along with fingerprint records. So it's a surprising amount of intimate data on government employees. You could easily imagine blackmail potential. Now, this might not happen, but for the rest of everybody's careers, they have to worry about this. Anytime we have a biometric access system that uses fingerprints, every government employee has to worry that some foreign power has a copy of their fingerprints. This is incredibly devastating, and I think will have effects for decades that we don't fully understand, because we don't really know how valuable that data is yet. But like all privacy data, you can't undo it. Right? If it's a password, I can create a new password. That's easy. If it's a fingerprint, I can't create a new thumb. So whatever happens 10, 15, 20 years that might use that fingerprint data, I might be vulnerable.
Interesting. Interesting. So what do we do about it?
This is hard. And there's a lot of it here. Right? They're securing our infrastructure. And we're seeing a lot more. Right? President Obama just proposed $5 billion extra to start solving this problem. In the wake of the OPM breach, there was a government-wide chief privacy officer appointed to try and help solve this problem. So we are looking at different ways to clean up our data. And it's not just data of employees, right? You could imagine data from, I don't know, food stamp recipients, right, being stolen and used for identity theft and fraud. We've seen data from researchers. You can imagine, remember the State Department cables, right? This is data used in private conversations within the US government about foreign countries being exposed and the embarrassment there. There's all different aspects to it. Now, these are hard problems. We're living in a world where attack is easier than defense. In cyberspace, it is easier to attack than defend. Some of it's going to be being more open, right? Believing that we're exposed. I know people who work for major NGOs, and they assume that their networks are penetrated by foreign governments.
It's a nonprofit organization. I take it. It's a nonprofit organization.
Yes. You know, something like, I'm just making this up, Human Rights Watch.
Okay.
Which is operating in a dozen different countries and field offices in 30 more. And a lot of these countries are pretty unsavory.
Now, I know
the governments will want access to what they're doing.
I know their work is being done at the UN, looking towards some kind of international protocol, code of conduct, agreement. How far along is that? What kinds of things are they looking at? And is the United States actively participating in that?
So this is the notion of cyberspace treaties. And I'm a big fan of cyberspace treaties, even though many of them are fundamentally unverifiable. Right? If you think it was hard to find, weapons of mass destruction, it's even harder to find, a cyber weapons lab. It could be in a basement somewhere. And that makes these very difficult treaties. But the act of negotiating them, the act of coming to agreement, I believe is incredibly valuable. There is talk, right? US and China came to agreement last fall. There's talk about international treaties. Right now, they're not far along at all. And the US is participating, but is not leading. There is a belief that we have an advantage in cyberspace and that a treaty would hurt us more than help. I think that's misplaced, but I think that's a common perception. Right now, because espionage is such a major factor and the US is sort of the lead player in internet espionage, we don't want any treaties for that. For attack, we are more open, but I don't think we're really seeing anything. This is a cyber war arms race that is unfettered right now. And even worse, we're seeing cyber weapons arms manufacturers. So Hacking Team, an Italian company, Gamma Group, a UK company, sells cyber weapons for espionage, for attack to countries like Kazakhstan, Ethiopia, Sudan, Syria. These are countries that are using them against their own citizens. And this is also an unregulated market. There really aren't any norms in cyberspace like you have in the nuclear realm. There was treaties aside, there was a norm of we do not do this. And that norm was invoked many times in our history from the 50s until the early 2000s. You don't have those kind of norms in cyberspace. You don't have the agreements. We barely have hotlines between countries. And add in non-state actors. Last December, Sony Corporation was attacked in cyberspace by North Korea. In the weeks following that, there was legitimate debate in the community about whether this attack was perpetrated by a government with a $20 billion military budget or two guys in a basement somewhere. That's fundamentally extraordinary, that we cannot in cyberspace tell the difference between nation state and non-nation state actors, or even professionals and amateurs.
But it does seem to me that there's a crying need to try to come to grips with this in a way that doesn't send us off on a new Cold War here. Is there any international leadership, any country, any group of countries that, I know there was a conference in the Netherlands several months ago. Who in the international community is raising the alarm here? Who's saying, look, we've got to come to grips with this thing, that this is crazy, that we're just off on another multi-billion-dollar adventure? Anybody?
There are groups, and yes, there was a conference in Netherlands. That's one of a series, and I forget who put that on. East-West Institute is working this issue. The UN is looking at this. There are groups looking at it, and it's not just that everyone is ignoring it. People are recognizing that this is an arms race, and it has the potential to get very expensive and very destabilizing. I mean, to me, these are destabilizing weapons because of the attribution problem, because attribution is difficult. And it is. I mean, compare Stuxnet. Right? Stuxnet is I think the world's first cyber weapon fired by the U.S. and Israel against Iran. Now, it's an interesting attack. 2006, Israel attacked a nuclear power plant in Syria and did that with planes and bombs. 2010, we used a cyber weapon. We can certainly argue the cyber weapon is a more humane way of achieving the same foreign policy goal. But the difference was, I think critical one, is that the Syrians in 2006 could look up, see the flag painted on the tails of the bombers, and know who attacked them. 2010, Iranian nuclear power plants, the centrifuges are showing problems. They didn't even know they were the victims of an attack, let alone who did it. This lack of attribution makes this very destabilizing. You could believe you could attack someone and they don't know it's you. And whether we do that, whether Russia, China, any of these major cyber powers decide that's in their best interest, it'll be interesting to watch. Now, I mean, a simple treaty of uniforms, some analog of uniforms for cyber weapons, I think would go a long way. Now you have to worry about non-state actors. You have to worry about false flags. And one of the theories about Sony and North Korea was that it was someone else blaming Sony. Now, there's a lot of wheels within wheels here because of the attribution difficulty.
Twan, I'm going to have to move my location here at UCLA. And I guess we're okay. We're okay. All right. I was driven out of my office. Flock came in the window overnight, so we're okay. Maybe this is the time, Twan, now to go out to the broader community and, or at least take a look at some of the questions that people are sending in. So, if that makes sense, Bruce, why don't we?
I'm game.
Take a look at, okay. Talk about the administration's new cybersecurity national action plan. What is it? Does it make sense? Would you do it differently? If you were the advisor to the president these days, what would you be telling him about the U.S. role in all of this?
So it's interesting. So just this week, we had two things happen. We had James Clapper, Director of National Intelligence, go in front of the Senator Schumer's committee and give his annual threat report. And this is a very complex document. It's a result of a lot of work, and it's broad-ranging. And it ranges from terrorism to climate change. And like last year, cyber was the first threat. And the talked about attacks, the risk to the United States, not just in data theft, confidentiality, but in integrity and authenticity. So as we move to the Internet of Things, the worry is that attacks can actually have real-world consequences, right? Simultaneously disabling the brakes of every car on the road, which is really not an exaggeration, or doing things to power plants or to our home thermostats, that as these things become real, potential for attack becomes more real. You talked about that. Talked about the attackers. This year, Russia was elevated as the primary risk to the United States, because which I think is interesting is that Russia is more brazen. They're willing to risk attacking even if they're identified. Whereas heretofore they were just more reticent and more risk averse. China is still there, North Korea is still there, and then non-state actors I think is after. That happened on Tuesday. Also, the president released his big cybersecurity initiative, which includes a $5 billion increase in budget for security. Now, the answer to your question is the devil's in the details. I have not had a chance to read what details there are. You know, my guess is at this point there aren't going to be many. I like seeing cyber as a focus. I think we can do a lot of good, but here's the question, right? Attack versus defense. Cyber is a real domain, a real interesting domain in that everything I do to me affects you. So because we are all using the same infrastructure, we have the same protocols, the same networks, the same operating systems, the same computers, that the money I spend to improve my cybersecurity necessarily improves yours. And the money I spend on offense to attack your cybersecurity necessarily keeps mine vulnerable. This is a really interesting property. And we have to decide as a nation that defense is more important than offense. That we are going to deliberately make the NSA's job, make US Cyber Command's job more difficult, because in doing so, we make us safer. We make everybody safer.
Tell us about that.
But this is the idea that it's one world, and everybody's defense benefits or everybody's attack benefits. And so if we take that money and tell the NSA, your priorities are changing. You've always had these two missions, but now defense is more important. You find a vulnerability, you fix it. You find an avenue of attack, you close it. And that means our security gets better, but so does the security of every dissident working in the world, of the population of every totalitarian country, of the Chinese military. Their security gets better too, necessarily because we're improving the infrastructure that we all use. And that's going to be a hard thing to say. But I believe that will make us all safer. That reduces the arms race, right? That reduces the power of attack. There's a long way to go. There's a lot of research that has to happen. But we can't secure us and also keep them vulnerable. Right? That doesn't work. In a way, it worked in the Cold War. Right? You can improve American security in a way that it didn't affect Soviet security. Right? That doesn't happen anymore because we're all living. Cyberspace is one big infrastructure. It doesn't divide along national lines the way the physical world does.
Let me ask you about Congress. It's loaded with people who call themselves budget hawks, who one would think would be looking for ways to reduce federal expenditures, not expand them. Where are those folks? I mean, where's a guy like Rand Paul, for example, who keeps warning us that we're getting too engaged in international stuff, that we can't be the world's policeman, that we've got to
Rand Paul is kind of an outlier. I mean, as a libertarian, he's conservative, but fiscally conservative.
I understand, but we're the fiscal conservative. Where's
what we find is it really on both sides, there is this willingness to spend money on military and spend money on these attack capabilities. Defense, we'll see. I mean, I think it's going to be an interesting path for Obama's budget through Congress and whether cybersecurity gets funded. I'd like to think it would, because it does play into our fears. Now, normally I hate that, right? You'll see a lot of, I think, very dumb money spent on counterterrorism. But here there's value. I mean, not from the terrorist attack, but from the general infrastructure security. I mean, I'm worried about every actor from nation states on down to lone criminals and hackers. That as you make our infrastructure vulnerable, you start seeing all of these agents. I mean, the reason we had this debate, we didn't know if it was North Korea or a couple of guys, is that these techniques are very widespread. I mean, today's top secret NSA programs are tomorrow's PhD theses and the next day's hacker tools. So these techniques flow downhill faster than you'd expect. So anything we look at today and say, well, only China could do that, right? Only they are skilled enough. You wait 2 years and now it's cyber criminals. So fixing it now makes us safe in advance of the threat becoming more widespread. But the notion that you could determine the attackers by the weaponry like you can in the real world just doesn't work. I mean, you can't say, well, there's a tank, therefore it's the military, right? Only militaries have tanks. In cyberspace, everyone uses the same techniques, the same tools, the same tactics. It's all very homogeneous.
So, Tuan, what are we hearing from our participants around the world? Are they sending in questions? Are they?
Yes, you say we have a question I sent you already. You can many questions from Robert. Welcome.
One of them, Bruce, has to do with the role of the corporate community in all of this.
Yes.
I mean, that's a real good question, and that's sort of the other half of this. We're talking about governments, but you know, I mean, the NSA didn't wake up on one morning and say, let's spy on everybody on the internet. They woke up one morning and said, you know, the corporations are spying on the internet. Let's get ourselves a copy. This data is being generated by companies because surveillance has become the business model on the internet. Companies like Google, companies like Facebook collect our data and use that for marketing purposes. Cars, things, our data is being collected everywhere, cell phones. So this very intimate surveillance data is being produced and collected, not a lot of regulation on any of this, and that's where the government threat comes from. Now, I always point to a cell phone as a kind of surprisingly intimate surveillance device. One that if the government said you have to carry one, the entire country would rebel. Right? That cell phone knows where you are at all times. I mean, it has to, otherwise it can't ring when someone calls you. It knows when you woke up this morning is the first thing you checked. It knows when you went to sleep last night, because everyone has one and knows who you went to sleep with. Right? It has your email, your text conversations, your Google searches, what you're interested in. It is an amazing window into our intimate selves. And it is one that we let these companies look over our shoulder as we use. And that's what's driving a lot of government surveillance. One of the things Clapper said in his testimony, that all of these things give us new risks, and then he said, and new opportunities as well. I mean, he recognizes that government surveillance uses these capabilities, but it's governments for and against, right? Just as the NSA uses it to keep track of foreign leaders. We were spying on Angela Merkel's cell phone, the Chancellor of Germany. Similarly, right, foreign intelligence tries to use that to track us. A couple of years ago, we found that fake cell phone towers called SCHNEIER'S are operating all over Washington, D.C., near embassies, near government buildings, run by we actually don't know who. Right? So here we are with a vulnerable infrastructure that the FBI uses that is actually also being used against us. So again, one world, one answer.
But is the business community concerned enough about that? I mean, where's the United States Chamber of Commerce? Where are the large business organizations? Aren't they concerned about this? They do anything?
They're concerned that they won't be able to do this anymore. Remember, large businesses want to spy on you. And this is why we're here. They're concerned that government will take away their ability to spy on you. Facebook, Google, all of these companies. The only real outlier here is Apple Computer, because Apple isn't in the business of collecting your data. They're in the business of selling you hardware. They're more likely to produce hardware that is immune to some of this surveillance. Right? They are not collecting all of your data. Right? You know, Google's concern is that Europe is going to tell them not to spy on people as much as they want to. So, you know, there's very much a public-private, I mean, I use the term public-private surveillance partnership, that even though there's fights around the edges, right? Microsoft is fighting US government about data in a data center in Ireland. Primarily, everyone's on the same page here, that spying on people is good, and the more surveillance, the better. Now, this can't sustain. I think fast forward 10, 20 years and this reverses. But, you know, we're still in these early years of big data and collect it all, and there's value to be had here, and, you know, data mining and autonomy, AI analysis. Right? I mean, I'm reminded of almost the early years of nuclear power, when we were so excited about the promise, and it took us a couple of decades to realize, you know, the risks here are pretty great. Maybe this isn't that good an idea. Yeah, we're still in those early years on data, And it's going to take, I think, 10, 20 years before we step back and say, maybe not. Not that near-term optimistic, unfortunately.
I'm old enough to remember those early nuclear years where we were going to have free electric energy.
Right, too cheap to meter.
We kind of give it away. It's interesting. What else should we alert to?
Yes, I think we should ask Bruce a question from Bill Gates from the Washington Free Beacon.
All right, I'm ready.
Yeah, the US cyber warfare capabilities remain disjointed and harmed. So you can see.
So the question is about U.S. cyber war capabilities and the difficulty of there not being laws and rules and what's being done. Not a lot. There's a lot of discussion and not a lot of clarification. We do know that there are presidential directives on use of cyber warfare. The commands and DoD have come up with cyber war doctrine, but I think there's still a lot of things that are not defined. Some of it because we don't know how to define it. That we've never seen cyber war, so we can kind of pretend to have an idea of what it's going to look like. I think we actually don't know. And this is cyberspace, right? Cyberspace is barely understood. We don't actually design it. We kind of create it and then observe its behavior and try to run alongside it and figure out what's going on. And the emergent properties are amazing. I mean, just think of all the talk about the information superhighway from the 1990s and how profoundly wrong we got what cyberspace is. We tend to be terrible at predicting social change due to tech change. And the internet is all about social ramifications of technology. So while there are attempts in government to codify cyber war operations, what's considered an offensive action versus a peacetime surveillance action, I think we're hampered by a failure of imagination and an inability to understand what the reality is. And not because we're not smart, but because I think it's fundamentally unknowable.
One would think that we take some portion of these resources, which I suspect we know amounting into the billions, and start focusing on that aspect of the problem. What you think?
I think we are. I mean, I don't think we're ignoring it. I think some of it happens classified, and things do come out. And I know this is discussed. There's doctrine, there are books, there are conferences on these very questions. They're not being ignored. I think it's just fundamentally hard.
Juan, another question?
Yes, a question from Robert Whitcomb, number 8.
Look at question number 8.
Yes.
So the question is about the most alarming security threats facing the Internet of Things. I tend not to like alarming because I think we're already too alarmed. But the way to think of the Internet of Things, and I talked about this in I think it was a CNN piece a few weeks ago, and I'll talk about it at the RSA conference at the end of the month, is what the Internet of Things does. It does two things to the Internet. It gives the Internet eyes and ears, sensors, the ability to learn about the environment. And these might be thermostats or location sensors or Fitbits or cameras or audio sensors, like information about the world. And it also gives the Internet hands and feet, actuators. Right? That thermostat is collecting temperature data in order to change the temperature, right? To control the heating and air conditioning. Right? The driverless car will collect data about the road to make decisions about what to do. So these things are the eyes and ears and then the hands and feet. So now we have this thing that senses, thinks, and acts, which is the definition of a robot. When I think about the Internet of Things and then everything with it, I think we're building the world's largest robot and we don't even realize it. I call it the world-sized web. And the risks here are the risks you can think of. That this will have emergent properties you don't understand, that this will have vulnerabilities you don't understand, and the vulnerabilities affect the real world. And this is what Clapper talked about 2 days ago. Right? It's not OPM where the bad guys can steal your data. It's where the bad guys can do things to your world in a way that they couldn't when they're just computers. Right? Can change the state of cars, of traffic lights, of homes, of cell phones, of individuals, can actually do things. I think those are enormous risks. We don't fully understand them. And medical devices. We talk about internet-enabled medical devices that collect data about our bodies and then do things. Right? A pacemaker that's controlled through Bluetooth, where you can, and this has been demonstrated in the lab, deliver lethal shocks. Now you have computer-controlled drug delivery systems. You know, these have enormous promise. We want these things because of the good they can do, but they bring with them vulnerabilities. And I worry that these vulnerabilities are not well understood.
These would be controls affecting the dosage of medicine, for example, or
yes,
treatment of various kinds.
Right, and because one of the problems we have in medicine is people not taking their drugs. Right, non-compliance is a huge problem. So you give someone something they wear in their arm, and every 8 hours it administers the correct dose. That would be wonderful for the world. Right, we want to build that.
Providing nobody changes.
But we want to build it in a way that doesn't allow a malicious attacker to hack in and deliver a lethal dose.
Any evidence of that kind of malicious attack that we're seeing these days? I mean, we know of some, obviously, some we did, other folks have done. But what about more recently? Any?
You know, there are some. It's scant. It's very hard for us to figure out what attacks are cyber and what aren't. Right? There have been problems about power systems in the Ukraine in the past few months that's strongly believed to be a nation-state cyber attack. Do we have proof? No. I mean, that would be an example. Individual murder? No. I mean, we have lots of stories in the lab of researchers remotely disabling the brakes of cars. Leslie Stahl had that happen to her on 60 Minutes. She's in the car, and her reaction's great. So, as you'd expect if your brakes suddenly don't work. So we know this is possible. Medical devices have been hacked. Voting machines have been hacked. Has this been done in the wild for malice? As far as we know, no. Does that mean we should ignore it? No. Now, I worry about voting machines. I mean, certainly voter fraud is not a problem, certainly in this country, but election fraud is a huge potential problem. And when you have voting machines that can be hacked, when you have voting machines that don't have audit trails, you have an enormous danger to our election system.
We'll get in there. Yeah. Fascinating. So give us. Got another question, please?
Yes, I think we have many questions more. Continue saying from now. I think we can choose one question from Lan Anh from Vietnam.
All right, we think we have way more questions than time is the issue.
Yes. So she sent 4 questions. So we can.
And the questions are getting to be much smaller print.
Yes. That's interesting here, and I think the question. 4 questions. You can choose one of them. What question you like to?
All right, so there's a lot of good questions about Asia and powers and attack versus defense. You know, and I mean, my feeling is a lot of this is traditional international relations. That cyberspace is different in the tactics and different in the techniques, but not different in the people and the countries and the relations and the norms. And whether it's China or Japan or the United States or Korea, North or South, that I think that we just have to have good dialogues. And yes, there's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong, but I think we have huge opportunity for things to go right. And the more talking, I think the better. So, I don't have an answer. I don't think there is one that's technological. A lot of these problems have this aspect. They're intensely technological, but the answer is fundamentally political. Right? NSA surveillance is all technical, but the answer is going to be a political answer. And it's going to be the same way with cyber war, cyber espionage between other countries, that although these are technical, it's not going to be technical solutions. I mean, you see that all over security. Right? The real security you have against burglary is not the lock on your door. It's the laws in your country that arrest and prosecute burglars. The lock is a deterrent, but it's a minor one. It's really the social mechanisms that keep us safe. And that's going to be true in cyberspace. Cyberspace is going to be no different.
Strikes me, Twan, that would be a good takeoff point for the next session. Because I think Bruce has put his finger on a very important issue here. I mean, this does require a political solution. And how do we get going on a political solution?
Yes.
Who should be taking the lead? Where should it be done? What's the forum? All of those issues, which, especially listening to Bruce today, strike me as only in their infancy at a time when we ought to be taking them a lot more seriously, and a lot more people and a lot more governments should be working hard on that aspect of it. So why don't we think seriously about our next session being one that really focuses on that? Okay, we're talking a political solution. What should it be? Who should lead it? Where should it be? What should the focus of it be? Where do we get going on this? Because it seems to me on a political solution, Bruce, we're way behind here. Way behind.
I think that's right. We tend not to be good at proactive. We tend to be really good at solving problems after it's too late and muddling through. I mean, that's just the way our society works. And my worry is we have to be a little bit more proactive here, because technology is moving so much faster. It's no longer 30 years as technology becomes ubiquitous. It's six months.
You've given us some great guidance for moving forward on this, and appreciate very much your being part of this.
Hey, thank you.
Yep. Great talk and a great discussion, and I think wonderful section. Fantastic ideas, Bruce.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And as Governor Michael Dukakis said, that is you today forming for our discussion continue moving forward about the BGF's G7 Summit initiative for Japan this May. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your brilliant ideas.
Thank you.
And Governor, wonderful opening remark and discussion moderators. Yes.
Bruce, thanks to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I'm so is the morning in LA. Have a good day,
Thank
Governor.
you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Appreciate it.